Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot. We charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels. This is Jack.
And I'm Amy.
In Season 2, we explored Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Mist and Fury.
In our postseason content, we look forward to sharing listener feedback we received, as well as interviews with some exciting guests. You can also expect to hear some special listener-requested content.
The views expressed by the hosts and guests are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning. Explicit language, as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, self-harm, and depression will recur throughout the podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to a special episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. In this postseason episode, we are responding to listener requests for Amy and I to share our writing. This week, Amy has recorded her narrating the first chapter of her novel titled Light of the Forebearers. Light of the Forebearers is the story of a princess who has no desire to ascend her throne. When a neighboring kingdom invades, she uses the opportunity to escape her responsibilities and looming coronation, choosing instead to flee her kingdom. The umbrella series, the Wandering Heirs Series, is the princess's journey as she navigates the guilt that comes with abandoning her people and her decision whether to remain free or to reclaim the mantle of her birthright.
I'm so excited to share this chapter with our listeners. Light of the Forebearers is the first novel I've ever written. I'm currently in the revision process, and I'm excited to work on finalizing my manuscript. If you would like to read a PDF version of the chapter, it will be made available to all tiers of our Patreon supporters. I would love to hear your thoughts and get your feedback too. Please feel free to share any thoughts or comments with me via our feedback form on booktalkforbooktalk.com. I do have to give one trigger warning before I start. This first chapter has subtle references to eating disorders. With that, I present to you the first chapter of Light of the Forebearers, a Wandering Heirs novel. Prologue. There weren't always dragons in the valley. Only clever machinations brought the reclusive creatures to the misty half-light of the Aether's Valley of Sleep, where so many shadows and nightmares roamed. The waking world thought the mythical beings extinct, yet there lay a dragon on the valley floor. Against the backdrop of the deep violet sky customary for the ether, it could have just been sleeping. But closer inspection revealed scales littering the ground around its carcass, and there was no mistaking the humanoid horde piled atop the beast's remains like the stones of a funeral mound. Death shrouded those bodies, too. A pair of travelers approached the scene. The taller of the two, a black patch slung across his face to cover his left eye, drew a sword of crystalline bone from the sheath at his hip before cautiously stepping up to the corpses. He peered down with his one good eye. A harvest. As he sheathed his blade, he kicked a nearby body with his boot. Black soot plumed into the air around them.
Burnt to a crisp and then sliced open. Looks like their hearts and stomachs were taken. Likely after they ate the dragon alive.
The other traveler carried herself like someone accustomed to taking charge, keeping some distance as she surveyed the extent of the carnage. Her wise eyes were cold as her plump lips thinned in disgust. "Taken for charms," she hissed with venom.
"But the artisans don't travel here."
She shook her head, her normally bright hair dull in this realm where the sun never rose. "They don't have to."
"What are you suggesting?"
With fists clenched at her side, she grimaced at him. "I can think of one or two of our kind who would gladly assist with a massacre for the right price." She motioned their signal for retreat with her head, and the pair resumed their trek across the valley. They were still far from their original point of entry, the tear that allowed them to pass from the waking world to the ether, and they were overdue to return.
"You're going to report it."
He looked at her sidelong with his one eye. When she did not answer, he pressed.
"Bernadette, we have to report it."
"I'll lead the retrieval party for the bones myself," was all she said. Chapter 1. Rose Manor was not your typical estate. The staff that tended the fields and the animals surrounding the property were rarely, if ever, awake before sunrise. It was a blessing, really, Evelyn decided. It meant less people were witness to how little she slept. It was still dark when Evelyn exited the barn at the edge of Rose Manor's property line. Frayed edges of the sun were only beginning to climb the vast, dark sky, and in the dim light she pulled errant pieces of hay from her mussed hair. She would have to replat it before she went about her chores. Crossing the fields back to the manor proper was quickly becoming a daily occurrence, though Evelyn had yet to do so in full daylight. Sweat from her nocturnal activity still clung to her neck and back, and chilled quickly in the crisp air that accompanied the minutes before dawn. The tremors that often plagued Evelyn at this hour threatened a reprisal, her thin muslin dress doing nothing to protect against the cold. Tempted as she was to cast a warming spell, Evelyn refrained. Any light from the activated spell would have been like a beacon, and the whole point of a rendezvous at the barn was to be discreet. The sky was purple-pink by the time Evelyn passed the fence line for the main house. Low, hanging blue clouds peppered the horizon, uncharacteristic for this time of year. The spring rains would be early, then. The many windows on the face of Rose Manor flared alive with sight as Evelyn approached the rear service door. She knew it was simply the reflection of the creeping sun, but still the windows seemed to blink down at her, like the too many eyes of a giant arachnid or a demon. Evelyn shook her head to chase away the thought. She had spent too much time reading the horror novels Damon favored over his shoulder the past few weeks. Something bright flashed in the corner of one of the upper windows. Evelyn started, then realized it might have been Lady Mirren preparing for the day. The thought was enough to spur Evelyn on. The empty lower hall of Rose Manor greeted Evelyn with silence, a small mercy for which she thanked her forebearers. Certain no one else was about, she beelined for the small mirror near the entrance. She would have to make quick work of her hair so that none of the staff roused from their beds and spotted her. Her olive skin had turned yellow from the cold, and Evelyn's frozen fingers fumbled for a minute before she regained enough feeling to successfully plait her hair. The tie was barely back in place on her long dark braid when Georgiana bustled in through the service door, her flaxen curls bouncing with every step, clutching a basket full of freckled eggs close to her chest. "Sorry I'm late." Evelyn rushed forward to grab the basket. Georgiana twisted it out of reach. "Late to do my chores for me," the blonde sniffed as she continued her path toward the kitchen. "It's about time I had to go to the coop myself." "But you hate those hens." The rosy cheeks that betrayed Georgiana's youth swelled as she pursed her lips. "And yet I managed." Evelyn dared to raise her brows in surprise. Georgiana sniffed again as she set the basket down on the preparation table in the middle of the kitchen. "I told them exactly what I'd do if they tried to peck my hands. Once we came to understand one another, they left me well enough alone." "A stern talking to always cows me into submission," Evelyn said with utmost seriousness. This was met with bread flour flung in her direction as Georgiana prepared the table for their morning chores. Evelyn scoffed, and her friend scoffed back. A heartbeat later, and they both grinned at each other, silently agreeing to begin their morning routine. It was unclear to most how these two had been assigned to daily bread and breakfast preparation for the household, but in the 14 months since their arrival to Rose Manor, Evelyn and Georgiana had perfected their dance around the kitchen. It was better choreographed than any that could be found in a ballroom, and the food they prepared had become passable, too. The simplicity of it brought a smile to Evelyn's face.
So why were you late this morning?
The question came from Georgiana only once her flour-stained hands finished loading the range with its daily commission of loaves. Evelyn avoided the younger woman's searching gaze and focused on dishing scrambled eggs onto a serving platter.
Is Lady Mirren awake yet?
Evelyn asked instead. There was a sigh.
Does the taskmaster ever sleep? She probably knows you were out all night too.
When their eyes met, it was only long enough for Evelyn to motion toward the lower dining room with her chin and lift the platter in her hands. A frown obscured Georgiana's pretty face.
Please remember to eat breakfast today,
the blonde called as Evelyn strode away. The parting words had become a sort of mantra over the past year, said more as ceremony than an attempt at reproach. The staff dining room was already filling with the lower residents of Rose Manor, many yawning polite hellos as Evelyn placed the platter of eggs in front of them. Several remained standing, despite previous instructions not to do so, almost reverent as they waited for her to complete her task. Where once it had been normal, in recent months, Evelyn had begun to feel unnerved when too many people paid attention to her. Her hands began to sweat at the thought of all those eyes focused on her every move. Best to drop the food on the table and dash, she told herself. The elderly woman nearby peeked up from her powder blue kerchief and smiled with what remained of her teeth.
Sit with me, child.
Evelyn forced a smile. Agatha, darling. There was no opportunity to finish because Agatha all but dragged Evelyn into the seat beside her, the elderly woman's shapeless dress disguising the strong arms of someone who had been hanging wet bedding to dry for nearly 50 years. Evelyn made to stand, but Agatha's grip was firm.
Stay.
Agatha nodded.
Your mother always used to.
The old woman waved at the remaining staff who, befuddled, did not know what to do about breakfast from where they stood. None of them moved until Evelyn nodded, and soon everyone was seated. The room filled with the cacophony of voices and scraping cutlery as the staff dug into their meal. The fidgeting was harder to control than usual. Evelyn wrung her hands and played with the tip of her braid to keep herself distracted. She had learned quickly that it was easier to ignore the smell of food when she was moving. She had even learned that cooking was unproblematic so long as she was constantly occupied. Now, however, confined to a chair with no distraction, the smell of the eggs trapped Evelyn in its snare. Her throat constricted painfully. There were a few times Georgiana flitted in and out of the room with loaves of bread, and Evelyn tried to insist she help her friend, but Agatha maintained a tight hold on her elbow. What are you doing here? Chairs scraped against the stone floor as everyone but Evelyn stood to attention at the sound of Lady Mirren's voice. It did not require them to make eye contact for Evelyn to know the lady of the house spoke to her. The rest of the staff kept their eyes downcast, the stance of those accustomed to becoming invisible. Grateful as she was to leave the eggs behind, Evelyn wished it was not under the enquiry of Lady Mirren. I was just leaving. Evelyn stood and bowed her head. Get on with it, then, Lady Mirren said as she clasped her hands against the bodice of her dress. It was then that Evelyn noticed what Lady Mirren wore. Though the lady of the house kept her ink-black hair in its customary tight knot, it was surprising to see her dressed in the navy gown with gold trim around the bodice and neckline. It stood out against Lady Mirren's caramel skin, the material too fine for this place, for the eye-sized marble she always wore on a long chain around her neck. Evelyn was certain she had not seen Lady Mirren in that gown since before Rose Manor. You look nice today, Evelyn said softly when she paused at Lady Mirren's side. The lady arched a brow but did not meet Evelyn's gaze. With a nod, Evelyn took her leave.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
For all of an hour, Evelyn found reprieve in the stillness of the manor library. The modest furnishings in the moderately sized room were elevated with the occasional tasteful craftsman wood carving from Thayer's Capital or a piece of crystal work from an Estonian artist. It epitomized the rest of the manor, really. Comfortable, quaint, with a disdain for lavishness. It was where Evelyn felt most at home. In the quiet, Evelyn skimmed a tome on illusion-based magic. It had been a while since she thought about spells of that nature. She decided she was overdue for a refresher. The door adjoining the breakfast room burst open. Rachel stormed through it, already in a temper from the way she stalked toward Evelyn. Damon trailed behind the young mistress, his nose buried in a book. Evelyn discreetly closed the tome on her desk and stood.
"Do you know what it's like having to dine with someone insistent on silence?"
Rachel fumed. She took her usual chair opposite the boy at the instruction table and flipped her auburn locks over her shoulder. Her normally fiery hair had muted during the winter, her golden skin paler due to a lack of gardening she customarily committed herself to during the warmer months. Evelyn did not doubt Rachel would be back at it the second the younger woman sensed the early spring rains looming overhead. But Rachel was not looking out the window at the clouds. No, she glared daggers at Damon instead, though it was impossible to tell if the young boy noticed or cared. Evelyn swallowed a sigh. "Seth didn't join you?" she said as she began to write the title of the day's lesson on the freestanding chalkboard close by. Rachel let out an exaggerated groan.
"The traitor overslept."
Evelyn paused, the chalk in her hand poised before the board as she considered turning to question Rachel further. But before she could move, the so-called traitor appeared at the threshold adjoining the foyer. Seth closed the library door behind him. "Sorry I'm late."
"That's quite all right,"
Damon said as he put his book down. The boy, barely 12, blinked up at Seth as the young man loped over and ruffled Damon's silver curls. Damon's equally pale eyelashes and frosty blue eyes against his ebony skin gave him a perpetual look of wonder. The look did not fade as he smiled at Seth. Rachel raised her freckled hands above her head.
"Thank the sages, he speaks."
This earned a chorus of shushing from both Evelyn and Seth. Rachel merely rolled her eyes in response. Seth flashed Evelyn a lopsided grin and a wink through his curtain of black hair as he took his seat. He normally wore his hair tied back now that it was past his shoulders, and she wondered when had been the last time she'd seen it down during the day. After the initial bustle of everyone's entry to the library, it took a while for the group to settle. But then they tucked into their work and time slowed to a crawl, the way it always did when the four of them were confined to the library. Evelyn could not blame Rachel and Seth for it. They diligently reviewed spells from the library's tomes, since both were now 18 and eager to further their studies in magic. The slowness might have even been tolerable had Damon not refused to comprehend the one lesson that should have been easiest for him to learn. No matter how many times Evelyn explained the noble houses of Thayer and the rules of succession, Damon could not, or would not, fathom it. Since today marked her third attempt at the explanation, Evelyn was confident she would force the boy to learn it, or both of them would fail to see the tea table today.
"But why does the heir marry a foreigner if the kingship changes noble families periodically anyway?"
The incredulity Damon expressed made both Rachel and Seth look up from their notes, the former with a growl and the latter with an amused smirk. Evelyn took a deep breath before proceeding. Because it prevents unnecessary contention between the noble families, as well as curbs any temptation for inbreeding. By doing so, lines of succession from generation to generation and family to family remain clear.
Unlike Aldeans,
Rachel sneered. Seth elbowed her.
Unlike Estunians.
Rachel elbowed him back. Damon, indifferent to the interlude, tilted his head as he looked at Evelyn.
why was I chosen for the betrothal? There are other foreigners who are older than me.
Every eye in the room turned to Evelyn then, the gaze of one individual particularly heavy. It had been a long while since Evelyn felt so many differing opinions weigh on her. She had forgotten how much she hated it. The Estunian grandmother clock chimed noon from the foyer. With a silent thank you to their forebearers, Evelyn smiled and said to Damon, "I think we can discuss that tomorrow." The young boy nodded once before he picked up the book at his side and resumed his reading. With a small frown, Seth went back to scribbling notes. Rachel stretched her arms above her head and sighed.
How much longer until Georgiana has lunch ready?
The redhead pouted. But Evelyn's attention was fixed on Seth. His frown, though fleeting, had bothered her. She rose from the instruction table and took a few steps until she stood behind him. With only mild curiosity, she leaned forward to peer over his shoulder, her plait slipping between their bodies to brush his back. "Restoration magic," Evelyn murmured. Seth hummed in affirmation, his concentration so deep that the tip of his tongue poked out between his lips. It stood out like a summer berry against his tan skin. The urge to lick her own lips nearly overcame Evelyn, and though she resisted the temptation, she did not fight the impulse to lean close and whisper in Seth's ear. What she would say, she wasn't sure, but it seemed she would never know. For it was then that Evelyn noticed the piece of dry straw cloaked in the night black hair closest to Seth's ear. The sight made her stomach knot pleasantly. With a careful hand, Evelyn reached forward and retrieved the errant hay from Seth's hair, Seth leaning his head back to chase her touch as she withdrew. Someone cleared their throat. Evelyn pocketed the straw in a fold of her muslin dress and stepped away from Seth's back. When she looked to the others seated nearby, Rachel was pointedly looking at the floor, while Damon's pale eyes and white lashes peeked up at Evelyn from the top of his book.
Lady Mirren is coming,
the boy whispered low. How he knew was anyone's guess, but Evelyn made sure she was at the chalkboard erasing her notes when the lady of the house glided into the library with a swish of her deep blue skirts. "Lunch is on the table. Chop, chop." The staccato clap of Lady Mirren's brown hands accentuated her words. The occupants at the table responded like well-trained poodles. Rachel led the way, muttering something akin to it being about time, with Seth trailing behind Damon to ensure the lad did not run into any doorways, since Damon was never one to stop reading for mundane tasks like walking room to room. Lady Mirren and Evelyn were the last to follow, Evelyn taking up the rear, only long enough to exit the room before she slipped away to the stairs that led from the foyer to the upper floors. Evelyn had only managed to ascend 2 steps, her body as far from the banister as possible to avoid detection, when Lady Mirren caught her. "Where do you think you're going?" With a deep breath, Evelyn approached the railing to find Lady Mirren standing by the doorway Evelyn had hoped to avoid. The lady of the house's tan face was severe as she glared up at Evelyn. It took Evelyn longer than it should have to force a beatific smile onto her face. "To continue my project in the attic," she said. "I don't think so." Lady Mirren motioned to the dining room. "You will join us for lunch today. I insist." A sick feeling churned in Evelyn's stomach. The recurring nightmare she had when she chanced to sleep, the same images she saw when she ate in secret, flashed in her mind's eye. She retreated a few steps toward the stairs and raised her chin. "You will not tell me what to do." An eerie silence filled the hall, muted only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandmother clock. A pounding in Evelyn's head started up, timed perfectly to the clock as if it were a metronome, and her head the instrument being played. The effort of staring down Lady Mirren always caused Evelyn strain. Though she did her best to maintain her smile, Evelyn felt it would fray at the edges before the older woman relented. Scrutiny had never been a good friend of Evelyn's, though it seemed to call on her frequently enough in the form of Lady Mirren. But then the lady of the house gave a long-suffering sigh, saying, "Fine, off with you," accompanied by a dismissive gesture of her well-manicured hand. Swallowing her relief before it could betray her, Evelyn disappeared without another word.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
The faraway sounds of cutlery on china and muffled chatter clung to Evelyn's skirt as she ascended to the dusty upper recesses of the manor. As a child, this place had haunted her. She and her sister had made sport of taking turns to dare or bribe each other to traverse it in the dead of night. Their aim had always been to see who would be first to cry in terror at the shadows and creaks in the floor. Now the attic seemed filled with nothing more than dusty motes falling on lonely trinkets and chests full of dated clothes so moth-eaten they were scandalous. In the months since their arrival to Rose Manor, each of the residents had fallen into a role, and Evelyn had settled on historian. With some occasional assistance from Seth, she taught Damon Theron history and culture each morning to prepare the boy for his role as the heir's betrothed. In the afternoons, she scavenged for anything precious in the stacks and trunks tucked away in the attic. There was much to find, Evelyn had been pleased to discover. Though the manor had not been occupied in over 15 years, lifeless all that time, the interior still contained all the belongings of its former inhabitants. Inhabitants like her long-deceased mother. It was bittersweet to touch the things Odessa Penrose had once owned. Evelyn missed her every day. An assortment of tattered books was the day's focus, each clinging to life by a scant dozen threads and blots of ancient glue. Evelyn collected stacks of them in one corner of the attic with a few pull and push spells. The dust that accompanied the effort set off an unfortunate coughing fit. Once recovered, Evelyn sat and turned her attention to the books at her side. If anyone had been watching, they would have seen a pained smile flit over Evelyn's face as she grabbed Estunian Legends for Young Mages off the top of the first stack. It was a book she had loved as a child, despite it being as thick as a dictionary. Chock full of the most well-known legends of her mother's homeland, it told the tales of the sages idolized by the people of Estune. Burdened with fond memories, Evelyn slowly turned the delicate pages until she found the entry she was looking for. Dressed in golden robes with a sunburst nimbus crowning her head, the depiction of the first queen had always been Evelyn's favorite. The lack of features on the marble white face had never irked her as a child, which she found odd as a wizened adult of nearly 21. Maybe it was simply because Evelyn had been mesmerized by the pair of winged serpents at her side, the beasts brutal and beautiful in their portrayal. The story of the first queen formed on Evelyn's lips as she read to herself. A woman chosen by the sages to be a herald to the land, a bringer of peace to a nation devastated by civil war, who then formed the queendom of Estune. With a feather-light touch, Evelyn traced the water ring at the top of the page with the tip of her finger. Once, she had foolishly left a cup of cold milk on the paper as she stared at the queen's blank face and the creatures at her side. The memory took her back to a time Evelyn could hardly remember most days. She shook her head and closed the book with a snap. Some memories were not worthy of remembrance. Evelyn set aside the book, certain Damon would love to read each sage's story. The rest of the first stack of books proved less interesting than the initial discovery. Some were old encyclopedias Evelyn would have donated. A few were histories of the surrounding kingdoms with notes in the margin, notes she suspected were in her mother's hand. These Evelyn set aside to have mended. At least 2 were in languages Evelyn did not recognize. She settled on keeping them until someone could deem their worth. Halfway through the third pile, Evelyn's fingers and palms began to itch from all the dust. She levitated her finds to areas of the attic that she had designated for keeping or donating before wiping her hands on her skirt, less to get the dust off than to calm the irritation. The hour or so that followed was spent elbow-deep in random trunks full of battered tapestries depicting sleeping dragons, old china, twin daggers made of crystal and bone, and other items that, while valuable, were not of the sort Evelyn was after. It was not until she decided she was sufficiently late for tea, someone had called for her at least 15 minutes prior, that something heavy tumbled out of a bag of silk scarves Evelyn had just upended. An austere leather book had fallen like toast butter side down, its pages open against the wooden floor. A shiver of cold ran up Evelyn's arm as her fingers grazed the cover. She did not know yet that it was not leather in her hand when she picked it up, but a treasure, a jewel she had never dared hope to find.
And then the little sprite turned on Eve and bit her full on the arm. Adelaide and Daphne keep reminding me that we were no different at the ages of 2 and 5, and plagued me with stories of the atrocious things we used to do to each other as children. I don't know how I ever forgot. Time does that to memory, I guess. Daphne assures me it will get better. But how does she know? At least Adelaide has enough sense to keep quiet about things for which she has no experience. Anyway, if my parents managed the 3 of us, and we seem to have turned out all right, then I can manage my 2 daughters. I just hope they learn how important their companionship as sisters can be. Speaking of companions, just the other day, Frederick decided. Evelyn snapped her mother's journal shut. She had no desire to read private thoughts about her father. She had enough of her own on the topic to last a lifetime. The leather of the binding was cool to the touch, and something about it sent waves of energy up her arm. It was certainly more than just a journal, though what else it might be was hard for Evelyn to determine. There were sporadic entries about Evelyn and her sister throughout, but it was mostly full of sketches, including one of the twin blades Evelyn had come across earlier that afternoon, as well as magical runes she did not recognize, and more writing in languages foreign to Evelyn. She had only known her mother to speak Common, the language she and her sister had grown up speaking and used throughout there, as well as modern and Old Estonian. While Evelyn could speak and read modern Estonian, Old Estonian was something she only recognized without comprehending. There was some of that in the book, but apparently her mother had known other tongues and wrote in them too. Hoofbeats on the driveway had Evelyn scrambling up, shoving the journal into a pocket of her dress and then striding to the lone window. Outside, the staff who worked in the gardens and the surrounding fields were racing to the manor, some with their gardening tools raised in the air, others with animals they herded in tow. The whinnying of horses drew Evelyn's attention to the manor's entrance below. 3 large stallions stomped their hooves, the humans they transported already disappearing from her line of sight, but not before Evelyn saw what they wore. Palace livery. Somewhere in the manor, animated voices were speaking. Evelyn thought she heard screeching from a female voice. Or was that squealing? Probably Rachel. And then they called Evelyn's name. Dread turned Evelyn's heart stiff, and her blood razor sharp as it slowed in her veins. Palace guards could only mean 2 things. The king was dead, or she would be in the king's presence by sunrise the next day. Though one reality was certainly worse than the other, the prospect of seeing the king alive did not appeal much to Evelyn. With a deep breath, Evelyn counted to 10. Just before she turned to descend the stairs, she scooped up Estonian legends for young mages, clutching it to her chest like a pitiful soldier brandishing a worn shield. Then Evelyn made her mourners march down to the ground floor, down to where they waited. Each step was a nail in the coffin for her time at Rose Manor, and though it was less intuitive than it had once been, she did her best to school her features into one of neutral grace as she met with fate. Evelyn recognized Francois's gravelly voice before she saw him. The captain of the guard was speaking in hushed tones to Lady Mirren, while Rachel and Seth spoke more openly with the 2 palace guards who had accompanied Francois. Damon stood sullenly in a corner by Georgiana, whose pale hand gripped the boy's wrist. The flour coating her hands stained his dark skin like a brand. All quieted when Evelyn appeared. Rachel beamed up at her with a joy so bright it reminded Evelyn of the days they spent together as young girls after their mother's death. That time felt both distant from Evelyn and like yesterday, a familiar stranger. "We're going home," Rachel sang.
Beyond the shoulders of those gathered in the manor's foyer, Evelyn could see the rest of the staff through the open front door. Most looked in with tears staining their faces. At least 1 or 2 pairs turned to hug each other. "Tell me," Evelyn said, voice soft and solemn, "is my father well?" "Yes, Your Highness." Francois's bow was deep. The other guards bowed even deeper. She could not help herself. Evelyn turned her head, her heart lurching. Not because her father was alive, but because, when she had woken that morning, she had not considered the possibility that her time at Rose Manor would come to an end. When Evelyn looked back at the gathering, she forced her face into a serene smile. Many smiled back at her, all except Seth, who watched her through his brows, silent and still as a fawn. Francois and the guards stood upright just as Lady Mirren clapped her hands. "About face, everyone. We have a lot of work to do if we are to leave tonight." The staff outside, palace guards themselves, cheered and clapped each other on the back as they dispersed. Rachel flew past Evelyn and up the stairs to her room, presumably to pack. Seth ascended the stairs slowly, pausing briefly to touch Evelyn's elbow as he moved past her. But Evelyn could not acknowledge it, could not accept the small attempt at comfort, not with so many eyes on them. Her grip on the book in her hands became vice-like. "So soon?" Evelyn asked Lady Mirren, who stared at her through narrowed lids. "Yes, Princess Evelyn." It was Francois who answered. "King Frederick is expecting you."
Thank you for listening to this special episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform.
As we gear up for Season 3, where we will deep dive into A Court of Wings and Ruin, we will continue to share between-season thoughts, interviews, and exclusive content.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini-episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.